Good morning, good evening, good afternoon.
Good morning, good morning.
I see Dell made it.
Say again?
Hello.
I see Chad's shining face. Hi, Simon. The boss isn't here yet, so but Balto, I'm looking forward to your sharing with us. Dell, I'm glad you made it.
Made it.
And Alistair, welcome.
Thank you. Welcome to all of you.
I see Eric, I see Robin, I see, well, it's not bad. I had several people tell me that they were not going to be able to make it because they're still basically, they're now in recovery mode from having way too much time off over the holidays. Their to-do lists got look worse than mine. But while we wait for Celia to show up, I shuddered. Let me see. Let's see how gruesome I look on the webcam this morning. Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. A little bit of getting over a little bit of laryngitis. There is apparently an upper limit to how much singing you can do without having repercussions. So let's see, boy, people are suddenly all popping up. Reagan, Alexander, and the boss. I mean, the host. I see a chat link here.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
So
I hear voices.
you hear voices. Well,
I only hear I only hear one, you know, in the still of the night, and what makes it awful is it's my conscience saying, "Don't do that," or "Do that." And one thing I should do is stop talking so much and and Celia, welcome, happy 2020, and you have the controls.
well, thank you. Happy 2020, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I'm still getting over, well, I have a new cold, so so my voice is a little off. I was aiming for that sexy kind of voice, but it just sounds like heavy smoker voice, so not as much fun. Do I have Eric and Hassan? Are either one of you scribing by chance, or Chad? Can I get a hands up or something? Or Norris?
Oh, I won't be able to this time because I'm kind of in transit.
Okay. Chad is in transit. And then I scared Hassan by asking him to scribe. So thank you, Eric, for saying that you will. I know that Valto's got some great information to share with us. So just as a quick check-in and welcome back to everybody, we're just going to ask that you share with us one word, because we have a lot of people on the call. If you have one word that you're coming into the new year with. Okay, so we'll popcorn, and I will start off by asking Dell, what's your word for the year?
Efficiency.
All right, pick somebody.
Let's see. Valto.
I would say speed, and I pick Norris.
You got to unmute, Norris.
Okay, my word is unmute. Or
Okay.
mute. I'm not, but energy is my real word. And Simon.
This is actually Jen MacDonald. I'm Simon's colleague, so I'm not sure if Simon's actually joining as well. Norris, you and I met each other at
Yes, you're more fun anyway.
Thank you. My word will be collaboration.
Excellent. And tell me your name again, Jen?
Yeah, Jen MacDonald from the Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Mount Royal. I'm Simon's colleague. I also have a cold, so.
Right, everybody with a cold. Now you have to go pick somebody.
Oh, Reagan, did you go?
My word for this year is reduce. How about we go with Chad?
Sure. Given the lot of what's happening currently, I think my word is compassion for what we're going through here. I think I will select Alistair.
My word is optimism. And I'll go to Robin.
Okay. This is my first time to participate. So I have to go with 2020 has to be vision for my word and maybe correcting in front of it for 2020.
All right, you've got Alexander and Hassan who haven't gone yet. And Eric.
Okay, so then I pick Alexander.
Oh, now you're muted, Alexander.
Okay, I go for overcome as the word and popcorn to Hassan.
Hi everyone. I had to jump out and then jump back in, so I missed what word we're looking for.
Just a word for 2020, your word for 2020.
Transformation.
So I think that leaves you, Eric, and me.
Let's see, I will say intention. And I'll popcorn back to you.
Okay. And I will say invigorated. And I'm going to, with that, turn it over to Valto. So just to give everyone an idea of what the call is going to be like, Valto is going to bring us out of chaos and or so you say, and talk about how all of this data and metrics all line up. We'll leave some time, hopefully, for some Q&A. But if you have some questions along the way, if you'll put them into the chat screen, that may be easier for us to go back over. And then at the end, we'll leave a little bit of time for any project information and any catch up. As far as news goes, you know what? The foundation just opened today. I have not spoken with anybody at the foundation yet, so I don't know what's going on at the Coffin Foundation. Victor has left the building, but he will go on to do great stuff, and we'll be very encouraged to find out where he lands. Still in support of entrepreneurship, still in the support of ecosystem builders, and business as usual at the foundation. So I know nothing different, and I'm excited about all the things to come in the new year. The dates for the 2020 summit are set, June 29th through July 1st or 2nd. We're working on the agenda right now. So that's all I've got to report on that side, and I'll turn it over to Valto.
Thanks, Cecilia, and thanks, Norris, for inviting. I have a bunch of information to go through, so I'll just try to hammer through, and then we'll hopefully get to discuss about those. I try to not show all of it, or all the bullet points, but Let's see if I get the presentation going.
We're glad to have you, and let me reiterate, you can leave questions in the chat, and that will, whoever said efficient, that'll help. I'm really excited, Balto.
Ooh, let's see. Seems that I have a new computer and it asks for some preferences. Hopefully I get
Okay,
it.
so I'm going to turn this over and make you the host, which you should be able to share your screen. Are you sharing stuff on your screen? Is that right, Balto?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I need to.
And while Volto figures that out, we're going to welcome Erin Baca. Hi, Erin. We all shared with everyone our word for 2020. So do you have a word that you'd like to share with us while he's working on the technical stuff?
Oh gosh. I saw that on the agenda and I didn't think of one. Give me.
No worries, we can talk
Intention.
to Jackie in the meantime.
Intention.
Intention?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. Jackie, welcome to the call. Do you have a word to share with us while Volto works on sharing his screen? Did we scare Volto? Oh, there he goes. Okay. Hi, Jackie.
Okay, let's try again. Yes, I think it's much better now. Okay, can you see it? All right, great. So let's just get on with it. So the point to go through is to talk about frameworks and how to bring order into chaos. So what's the function of the frameworks, and going through a case study a little bit. So first, well, just because probably share the presentation afterwards, here's my kind of list of stuff that I've been doing in context of entrepreneurship and business advisor and ecosystems. So the main point really here is to give a perspective that I'm an acting entrepreneur, have been doing entrepreneurship for more than 23 years, and currently actively involved in several companies. But one of my key passions is really about helping to scale entrepreneurship and through ecosystem development. But there's a lot of different perspectives that I've been involved. And before going into anything else, it's always important to get the terminology right. So I had to look myself also, what does a framework actually mean? So it's a basic structure underlying a system, concept, or text. So just to really kind of getting the basics of that. So if we look, of course, in the context of ESHIP, we already have a framework in place for the kind of the higher level. So it's anything that helps to bring structure into what we are working on to help get more order into the chaos itself. And this material that I'm going through is part of the material of our Ecosystem Development Academy that we have done in the context of Startup Commons. And the more about that can be found in the knowledge.startupcommons.org. And Startup Commons itself is one of the companies that I'm involved, and it's really accelerating startup ecosystem development globally. And basically we focus on education, consulting, digitalization on that side. And Startup Commons mission is to help scale innovation entrepreneurship globally through ecosystem development and digital transformation in those ecosystems specifically. And just also for the context, since 2013, we have worked with more than 30 ecosystems on the ground level. So that really means traveling there, spending time with all the different ecosystem actors and diving into all the various things that are happening there, and in the form of mapping and so forth, defining a vision and those types of things. So to get to the framework case study, basically this is a really kind of short and quick story about what we worked to start looking into innovation, entrepreneurship, ecosystem development, and why did we basically started with that framework. And, a rationale for the ecosystem perspective was that decisions and actions that impact these activities are always happening and will continue to happen. So it's not the most commonly kind of referred advice that entrepreneurs tend to give is to, specifically for public side, is to stay away and let entrepreneurs do their thing. But as we all know, it doesn't work like that. There's regulations, funding, and other instruments. So there's constantly various different things that are done anyway. So the target really is to help and improve those actions and decisions that are made, so that because they anyway happen, then the better they are, the outcomes will be. And to be able to improve, then everyone involved needs to understand and measure what is improved, and hopefully as same way as possible. So the beginning of the framework, this was kind of the first version was created in January 2013 to really help just kind of through the eyes of how startups are built, to break that building process into development phases and really look at it from the perspective of giving it a structure that is not verbal based, but actually using numbers so that it's more universally applicable, so it doesn't lose its meaning when it travels globally through different people. People understand numbers the same way, whereas different terms can be easily ways. So that was one of the things. There was also a story behind the colors, which were actually like martial arts, that those are like belt colors. But eventually we figured that it didn't actually bring any additional value. But this was as super simple as we started. And pretty quickly, it then became important to define, create definitions, what each of these numbers then actually mean. And then this helped to bring structure, further structure. And the key really is for any framework is that it's something that is permanently there, and then through different versions, it's iterated and improved without kind of creating completely different documents or so forth, so that the framework itself is a development item. And then there's 2015 August, this is version 2.5 already. The framework itself offers this type of structure to help complete and iterate it forward. So it helped to collect all of the relevant information that is applicable for each of the different development phases, from the most commonly used terminology and concepts out there around startup development phases. So it's kind of like well, it's a framework, but it's like a canvas that you kind of hang things to that are relevant for overall use or development, depending on different perspectives. And then here is the current version, 3.6, that is used now. So the structure has stabilized quite a bit, and it's been used in many different ways, which I'll go further here now as well. So there's a whole full of documented history of this document and different changes over time through different versions on the Startup Commons website. So kind of can see how that has evolved over time. And then from that, we were also able to kind of find additional benefits by being able to separate two different parallel tracks that happen in the startup development phases, where the one part is developing the idea into product and into business, and the other part was to focus on developing the talent into co-founding team into organization. And this is also kind of one of the findings when using the framework. It was not originally there, but then that brought a very valuable dimension just by itself, by being able to separate these two things, but also looking at how they are need to be developed in a balanced manner between these two different aspects of developing a whole company. And our target from the very beginning was not to develop anything that would be proprietary or would be something that would only live a life of a closed model. So we looked into developing that as an open standard so that it can have a life of its own. And that means that anyone can freely use it. So it's published under Creative Commons, so it can be used, versions can be created, it can be translated. If it doesn't work for someone, they can create a better version of that, rename it, use it for other purposes. Or the other aspect is that they can contribute, and there's a dialogue to be had to improve the existing version to a new kind of master version with a new version number. So the key is really that it's openly available, it's open for anyone to use, to fork into new version without losing the original kind of history and effort behind it as it has come to that version. So that's the key part of the open standard approach. And then as that framework basically gave the kind of the center for what is being developed in the ecosystem, so that we can look at the ecosystem development through the eyes of what the ecosystem is trying to produce, then the framework can be further used on kind of to expand into using in the ecosystem context. So the key is that to not start from the ecosystem itself, but to look what the ecosystem is there for, and then breaking that, what it's there for, into its pieces, and then looking the ecosystem then through that process. And of course, because we are now talking about, in this case study, we're talking about innovation entrepreneurship, which is how we defined startups, that they combine innovation and entrepreneurship to build a startup. So of course, then when we look at the ecosystems, it's useful to be able to divide the ecosystems in the similar manner into their own kind of separate and then overlapping ecosystems. So one of the key aspects when developing anything is, as mentioned, that if we don't understand it, then by definition we can't develop it. At least we don't know whether we are doing a good thing or a bad thing for the ecosystem. And the same goes if we can't measure it, then we don't know if we are making things better or if we are making things worse. So the challenge is to be able to break things into understandable pieces while they are logically connected and work as a whole. So the innovation side naturally starts or includes the typical research and development functions in the context of university side, the company side, and so forth. And the entrepreneurship ecosystem includes the entrepreneurs and all the entrepreneurial talent and other entrepreneurial people. But both of these live on their own. So research and development lives without entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship lives without innovation or research. So because of that, we can then conclude that innovation ecosystem is its own thing, where innovation can flow from without any ownership in different ways. And then entrepreneurship includes many other things, of course, than just startups and innovation-based entrepreneurship. And when we look at the type of talent, we can see in the innovation ecosystem of the type of just random terms there to give an idea. And then when we look at entrepreneurship ecosystem, we also have everything from lifetime entrepreneurship. We have makers, doers, designers, and so forth. And of course, pretty much any skill can also be practiced as in a form of entrepreneurship as well. So when we combine these two worlds together, we get to the point that startups are really kind of being formulated in the best ingredients or the most interesting ingredients from both of these two different worlds. And out of those typically come innovation entrepreneurship that is then formalized in an entity format or starting as a startup team into a startup company and so forth. So startups are really seeding within the innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystems, being influenced and fed by both ecosystems' best ingredients. And when we look at then startup ecosystems, we can say as a top level measure that the success of an ecosystem is measured by the volume and quality of great companies growing from the ecosystem. And if that's the top line measure, then we can kind of start reverse engineering and looking at different perspectives of that. So when we combine this logic of looking at these different ecosystems, we can identify the startup ecosystem in the overlapping both of these two worlds. And then when we applied our startup development phases framework on that, we can start to see a more kind of sliced and diced view into understanding these ecosystems and then the different actions in there. And we can then further kind of look a one step higher when we look at all those currently numbered 6 development phases. In some ecosystems, they have gone further in earlier development phases. So for example, they have gone -3 for entrepreneurial education or mindset building and so forth. But when we look at in those development phases, we can kind of aggregate to higher level into 3 different key phases that are then further useful for ecosystem context. And from that perspective, we can then look at ecosystem more as a funnel. It's not a closed funnel. There are multiple paths that different companies can take to form, but nevertheless, we can look at it from the perspective of funnel that then helps to consider different types of measures to apply or consider. And then, of course, the ecosystem organizations, we can start to first list them, but then we can further start to map them and further position them in using the framework. So the framework itself then is can be applied to looking how the different kind of cornerstone organizations or key actors position and the different groups of actors. And then, of course, in the format of trying to structure the ecosystem, it can be used more like a canvas to identify different organizations and their services that support a specific development phase, and then also what part of the company development, whether it's a product side or whether it's the organization development side, does that service apply to. And with that type of approach, we can then further continue to kind of map and piece based on the primary services and that the entrepreneurs or startups would come across in their different development phases, and basically then further map information and details out of each of these services. So if we first position them in the ecosystem canvas, we can get through the whole ecosystem different services. And then each of those services could be documented in a standard format. So the kind of template-driven documentation for being able to have useful information about the services in a effective way. And this would then have the similar logic behind, like formation, validation, growth, and so forth. And the key here, of course, then would be to also get to the key performance indicators. So getting to KPIs through this approach to look what are different organizations or services in similar development phase using as KPIs. So that's the type of approach that the framework can help to bring. So what is the overall target of the service? And then what are the measures for the startup while they are in the service? And what are the related service process KPIs to be used, measuring whether there's a kind of improvement for the development of that company. And then looking from the perspective of measuring startup ecosystem, we can say everything is a process. There's actually a nice quote by past president of Toyota: brilliant results come from average people managing brilliant processes, while poor results come from brilliant people managing broken processes. So what needs to be measured? Basically, there are three focus areas. How to kind of these all come from the benefit of having that framework is measuring the startup's progress and the contributing factors for that progress. So looking from the perspective of startup, navigating the ecosystem from the beginning to a meaningful company. And then on the service side, which can be seen as independent service processes along the way for those companies as they develop, looking from the service intake, output, efficiency, and feedback. And then the third category would then be the development activities that are on the level of trying to improve any different aspect of the ecosystem itself. So basically, to measure the startup progress from the ecosystem perspective can be achieved by measuring the ecosystem services themselves and then combining these different measures by different services. So on the higher level, then the ecosystem funnel can look in this kind of aggregated level where different services entry and exit numbers can be calculated, and then also the dropout rates during the service or between the service or between the development phases can be considered and measured, and this would give the higher level of ecosystem level productivity in the context of being able to produce these growing companies. And then this, of course, would be through the different services. So looking at some of the example measures, so here are the definitions for these different phases and from the different perspectives. So measuring the startup idea side, and then startup team to organization side, and then on the support side, measuring the support process for the idea side or the organization side. And then the key categories for the measures would be, of course, things like volume, quality, velocity, and then ultimately the return of investment. So volume is pretty clear, quality is pretty clear, velocity is something like, if I'm applying for funding, how long does it take from when I become aware of that or when I need that funding to when I actually have the process completed and the decision cleared and I actually have the funding available. But it can also be same as availability of mentoring, availability of a specific event, and so forth. And these I'm not going to list or go through, but this just gives an idea for different development phase-based types of KPIs based on the category. So for formation services, KPIs, volume, quality, and so forth, what type of measures to consider that each of these are more kind of extracted from the approach of considering everything as a process. So there are quite a bit of this, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but the main point of showing here is really that what does the framework ultimately kind of contributes to, and the other way around, that if there's a measure to be had, where would it fit in the framework to kind of hang it. So the framework serves a purpose of bringing that structure around the chaos, that otherwise if these things can't be kind of attached to anything that other things can be attached to as well, then it's not, it gets really confusing. And here's just as an indicative ecosystem funnel measures. This is something that we have collected kind of an aggregated average out of multiple different ecosystems, out of our own work, and also out of some of the other publicly available similar statistic sources of what does it actually take in the startup ecosystem to kind of go through the numbers on how does the conversions work between different development phases on startups, and then also for more SME type of companies. And then that would also give a better indication of what level of services or mentoring or whatnot should be available to support the types of ambitions that typically are set in different countries, more or less from the public side. And then measuring ecosystem development initiatives, we can then further look when not only looking at existing services, but also when we try to improve the ecosystem development aspects, is how this framework can be further utilized. So when we look at ecosystem development, we can have the values that we are trying to improve, and then identifying different items that we want to improve. So these can be things like innovation, talent, entrepreneurship, support, and so forth. And then having this type of framework to help communicate these in a consistent way. So what are we trying to improve, and what values of those we are trying to improve? And then simply placing the kind of, we're trying to improve the volume of innovation, we're trying to improve volume of talent, or it could be we're trying to improve the quality of support, and so forth, so that there is a consistency, that the measures themselves don't just hang in the air or in a format that it's hard to get a head around what is the relationship between this into some other measure. And then further, this can be pulled into putting those measures in an actual format to calculate also more kind of aggregated values, and even to get in the level of index of various different numbers, just for the sake of further analysis. And the point here is also to be able to identify, when trying to improve, let's say, velocity of support, and there's a development activity for that, does it have some side impact to something else? When we try to optimize something too much, it actually had a negative impact somewhere else. So that's the approach. And then this can further be then be broken down into development phases, specific measures for further detail, for further level of detail. So it's really to kind of have this logic here that only things that can be measured can be improved. Like in all ecosystems, many things within startup ecosystems impact other things. And this type of having a holistic framework, it helps to bring the information that something is being done somewhere else. How does it impact some other place? But the key really is to use this type of framework to create a structure that there is a connectivity and correlation between what is the ultimate target, which is the overall output of the ecosystem, to the smallest levels of what is happening in a specific event at the specific time, and having those measures consistent with each other, so that that's really the benefit of the framework. And we've also created this type of principles for startup development, ecosystem development, that they start from those understanding what's being developed to measuring what's being developed, and then taking that into having these common things to develop to actually be able to do shared things and working together. So if everyone just works on their own things, then it's really hard to develop and work together at ecosystem level. And then when those shared things that are being worked together, like the frameworks or the KPIs, are actually also used, are in shared use, then the overall benefits only start to come to light through that. So as long as everyone uses different tools, different measures, it's really hard to get ecosystem level benefits out of those. So I put here also the link to the full history of the framework and some use cases that we know about, at least where that framework is being used. There's a lot of places where it comes across that we never heard, but that's the benefit of these types of open standards, that they truly live the life of their own. Like you could imagine business model canvas that it's impossible for those who created it even to know how much it's used in different parts of the world. So that's it. That was the framework, and the point really is to consider what of those learnings can be applicable in the work here, or then if similar or different types of frameworks would be useful to be considered for the in our work here.
That's great, Valto. There's some questions in the chat. If you can just make sure that we cover some of those, that would be great.
All right, let's get, where can I find those now? I'm trying to find the chat in my view.
It can hide rather trickily. But there's a good one from Jackie.
And can I ask who's calling from Atlanta? Or has the 404 area code?
Oh, there's chat. Yeah. Well, okay.
This is Carrie Davis, probably me. That's me.
Okay.
I'm actually not in Atlanta right now. Sorry, that threw me.
Okay. No
Thanks,
worries.
Jackie.
All right. I'll get back to. Thank you.
So if I'm just looking at the first question, how much of a problem is a vendor capture? So basically a vendor lock, I would say, or so I would say that this is similar to like open source software and others, where it's very hard for this type of multi-year complex multi-stakeholder development initiatives to commit to anything that's proprietary because of the different risks that it comes through. So that's why also some of the most complex things like the internet need to be based on open standards and open even open softwares for the most part. So it's majority of internet is running on top of these types of things, and many of the most complex systems actually have to rely on that type of open source thinking.
Balto, has there been a problem with that in the past that you've experienced?
The problem is that the decisions either don't get made, or then that when decisions get made, they get very strongly questioned why or how those decisions got made for specific proprietary systems. So there's always a kind of different level to be able to justify the decision. So it seems a safer decision for many to rely on if there is a model or software or system that has momentum and it's open, that typically that is a safe decision to be made for many. And specifically public sector, they have, and they, whether it's directly or indirectly giving money or supporting or similar type of structure, that usually becomes a problem. It's similar to like non-profits versus for-profit in business, but it's just more on the asset level, I would say.
Hi,
There's
this is
always
Jack.
problems with proprietary because usually there's a competition for that proprietary owner.
Jump in, Jackie.
Hi, this is Jackie. Thank you very much for the presentation, Valto. You had one slide that showed, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Thanks.
Great. You had one slide that showed an innovation ecosystem separate from an entrepreneurship ecosystem. And the division between the two seemed to show that there was, you could have theory on the innovation side, and then it was practice on the entrepreneurship ecosystem side. Does that framework allow for theory to also be part of the entrepreneurship ecosystem?
Yes, of course. These are just for the kind of communication purposes. So as we know, these are very complex kind of worlds, but we wanted to go further than just combining that innovation and entrepreneurship and startups are all one ecosystem, because there is separation to be made. But of course, these lines are not like solid that you can clearly say is this white or black. They are more indicative that you can kind of belong to one or multiple of those at the same time.
Thank you. And I'm wondering if you have any opinion on whether a metric such as ambiguity aversion or risk aversion would better be classified in an innovation academia or within the academic research area of entrepreneurship?
Hard to say. I mean, ultimately, it's always people who make these decisions, and I would say that then that would go in. I mean, in our framework or that framework, it would go more under the team or talent to organization side. So it's more about the people development versus the business development.
Right. Yeah. I see exactly what you mean about that. And so people development, I guess I'm perhaps ignorant to know whether that would sort of fall more into innovation or entrepreneurship, or is that sort of something other altogether?
I would say it's entrepreneurship. So because innovation, if you think about it, it's the point partly is that it's separate from any one entity. So innovation can live a life of its own, kind of from organization to organization, from people to people, the same innovation. Whereas then when entrepreneurship they can't separate their own risk averse outside of themselves. They are risk averse, or the organization they form, their entity is a risk averse. Whereas the innovation doesn't really care.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful.
What else we have?
Alistair had a question.
Yeah, maybe because these are kind of short and specific, maybe you can voice those questions also for context.
Well, Dell has a question.
Yeah, I did, and it was one of the last slides, and it was the one where you had kind of the grid, and on top you were saying, yes, we need to bolster it here, we need to bolster finance, we need to bolster ROI or whatever.
Yeah.
Did you do any weighting of those? For example, finance may be more important in a given ecosystem than innovation or vice versa. So are you looking at them and saying, okay, well, innovation is a precursor to the other functions, therefore it should have a higher weight, because if you have a ton of capital but no innovation, the capital can't be deployed, etc.
So the whole point for us to start, like we really started when we started to look into the development, we started from the framework itself, and our point was that we don't really take kind of view into what those things should be, rather than having the framework that can handle it. So because a lot of these things then come from more of getting those numbers from any specific ecosystems for the first place, and then also looking at what are the different things that are already happening, and or what are the different ambitions by different actors, because like we know, the ecosystems are not really owned by anyone, so there is no kind of one way to say that we should do this or we should do that, because it depends also from the perspective. If you're an investor, you have different priorities and you try to influence the ecosystem behavior based on that, versus if you are talent, you try to kind of force it from that. If you're public sector looking for tax, you try to force that. So it doesn't really, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It's more of what the numbers say and what the collective who is making whatever specific decision is in question would like to act based on those numbers.
Walter, this is Alistair.
Yeah.
I think, so follow up to Dale's question, I think also Kristen had a similar question. That is, how do you measure? Do you survey people's opinions? Or how do you get numbers, which you've talked about, by measuring?
Yes, as our experience based on like generally the measures in any given ecosystems are extremely poor, or they are non-existing, or they are in some cases the measures are created at the end when they need to report to their financiers. So there's all kinds of different variations. So that's why. And then, of course, there are the surveys that are based on whatever the people who are being served from have knowledge about, which are also very limited way. So our long-term target is to try to get just the primary data from the systems that exist, where the data goes, where these activities happen. So that may be event registration systems, CRM systems, and so forth, and not trying to even look from the perspective of just trying to measure something that is either opinionated or the data doesn't exist or so forth. So that's more from our focus. But when looking from the framework perspective, the point is to give that framework as an indicative that whatever data you collect in whichever way, that there is a similar way to communicate with other actors to kind of find a more common language of where to have that. But in general, we are definitely in our work trying to focus more on the digital development and getting to primary data of the data wherever that exists.
Thank you. Thank you. That's clear.
Chad, did you want to chime in?
I do. I'm on the train at the moment, so it's a bit awkward. But also, quick question for you. Going on to where the data is stored, are you collaborating with some of the larger survey type approaches, such as Startup Genome and the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor? Because they've got a pretty rich history of creating these kind of thinking frameworks and data sources. And also, the second part of that is, how much do you integrate with some of the national data sources, such as employment registries and those kind of things?
So our approach is really to help develop the framework, and anyone can use the framework if it's useful for them, including any of the mentioned actors, if it brings value for them to use. So it's an open standard as such. We don't control that, so we don't really proactively try to anyone to use it, or we don't try to limit for anyone to use it. So that's also kind of one of the key ways how the value of a framework gets measured, is that if there is no value, then people don't use it. And if there is value, people use it. And the more people use it, the organization use it, the more collective value it will gain. So we use it in our own work, but we don't really work with secondary data. So that's why we haven't proactively tried, as our own resources and effort, tried to get secondary data into to be used. So that's more from those who we work with, like the ecosystems themselves. Whatever data they have, we help to get their own data to that format if they want, or they can do it themselves. But in our work, our target is always for the primary data. So what is actually the record of action that actually happened.
Man, this is 3 great sessions in a row. Alistair, then Chad, then Botho. We've only got like a minute and a half left. Any other quick questions, or does anybody have any announcements they'd like to share? Hearing none, I will say that I'm finishing up a proposal for the Big Academy of Management Research Conference. Jackie is actually helping with a research workshop proposal, and you'll be hearing more about that quite imminently. Anyway, Valtho, thank you. Be sure you share the deck. This has just been fantastic. Next month is scheduled Louisa Shepard from Memphis. She's got some very interesting stuff. We also have Startup Blink and Startup Genome queued up after that. Valtho, thanks for rising to the occasion and getting us educated.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
I will share the presentation in Slack, and if there's any other distribution channels, feel free to distribute it further.
I think that's great. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks very much.
And have a great rest of your week.
Way to go, Celia. And get your voice back. You do sound a little like Marlena Dietrich. So.
Gee, thanks. Thanks for saying that. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.